Today is April 14th. Welcome to our Ag Disaster Relief and Recovery Funding webinar. I am excited that everybody is joining us, and I'm going to hand it off to Dan Frazian, who is our Agriculture Emergency Coordinator at the Colorado Department of Agriculture.
Thanks, Sonia, and thanks everyone for joining. Just a quick background. I'll show you the outline for today. We'll start with a quick why we're doing the funding discussion today, some introductions, and then we'll go into the USDA Farm Service Agency programs, the USDA disaster designations and disaster assistance for businesses supporting agriculture from our Small Business Administration, State of Colorado's Agriculture Emergency Drought Response Program and our Department of Natural Resources. And then our DHSEM folks, Division of Homeland Security and Emergency Management, are going to talk about our presidential disaster declarations and some very basic high-level FEMA assistance that's out there. And then finally, the importance of record keeping and good documentation. So I just want to thank everyone for joining us. Last October, I was very fortunate to be hired on here at the Colorado Department of Agriculture. And my job is to consolidate projects and build a more comprehensive emergency management program for CDA. In January and February of this year, Commissioner Greenberg and I were receiving reports from livestock producers on the difficulties accessing natural forage and feed shortages due to severe winter weather. This was along our northern and southern borders of our state. The commissioner asked that we find the experts on agriculture disaster relief and host this webinar. We feel it is very timely that we're having this discussion, especially now with the significant snowmelt and localized flooding issues that are occurring this week in some of our western counties. And unfortunately, we are always preparing for drought, tornadoes, and the wildfire threat. So it's this team's mission that you walk away with a high-level overview of the designations, declarations, and programs that could possibly help our farmers, ranchers, and producers in the wake of an emergency that directly impacts agriculture. And we want everyone to understand the importance of good documentation so applications go smoothly. Please don't ever hesitate to reach out to me here at CDA, your local emergency managers, or your county FSA offices with questions or concerns. And now I'd like to introduce our lineup. We are honored to have 4 special guests and 6 presenters. Our guests are Commissioner Kate Greenberg, Director Doug Miyamoto, Farm Service Agency Administrator Zach Ducheneaux, and Acting Deputy Administrator for Farm Programs, John Burge. Our presenters today are Janae Rader and Mike Steffen from the Farm Service Agency here in Colorado, Cynthia Cowell from the Small Business Administration, Anna Moss from the Colorado Department of Natural Resources, Recovery Officer Jim Raymond from the Colorado Division of Homeland Security and Emergency Management, and Dr. Frank Gehry from the Colorado State University. So Commissioner Greenberg is going to start us off. Commissioner.
Well, thanks so much, Dan, and thank you everyone for joining us. I first off want to give particular thanks to Administrator Ducheneaux for taking time out of his day to be with us here in Colorado. The administrator has just been an excellent partner, and so grateful you're able to be with us today. Same is true for my friend and colleague to the north, Director Miyamoto. We've been moving through this winter together, knowing that a lot of the pressures we've seen throughout the last few months have been shared across our states. So just to really appreciate our partnership across state lines. To all of our fellow agency partners who are on, thank you for not only taking the time today, but just continuing to strengthen our partnerships as we sort of grow our emergency response capability at CDA. We want to make sure we're being great partners with you. And of course, all of us are here to serve those of you calling in, listening from around the state. Lastly, of course, want to thank my team at Department of Ag. Thank you, Dan, for pulling us all together and organizing this, Sonia for running the show, and many other folks behind the scenes for putting this together. I've been out in the field with many of you since I think is December 15th when the snow started, and maybe mid-March when it started slowing down. So for really the 3 months of a winter we haven't seen for a long time. And as Dan mentioned, we're now entering sort of this rapid flood season in a lot of parts of the state. But really it's just about emergency preparedness overall. And I think a big part of that is open lines of communication and making sure you all have the resources you need as well as the contacts at all of these various agencies. So I want to say thank you to the farmers and ranchers who have hosted me on your operations and shown me what you're up against. And this is an effort and an outcome of those visits and those relationships. So I want you to know that we are hearing you, and we mean it when we say lines of communication are open. I also want to say thank you to FSA overall, State Director Pepler and his team, and of course, Administrator. Back in, I believe, early January, Director Miyamoto and myself, as well as the Ag Commissioners from Utah and Nevada, penned a letter to FSA National asking for additional flexibility in programs. FSA has been very responsive, both here in Colorado and DC. So again, we just really grateful for that partnership and looking forward to the call today and just continuing our efforts as we move forward. So thank you all again, and hand it back to you, Dan, and thank you all.
Director Miyamoto.
Well, thank you, Dan. I also have a lot of appreciation and some thanks that I need to give out, particularly for Administrator Ducheneaux, and then also for my partner Kate to the south. It's been a trying year, and all of these emergency situations are unique. And I think that we as states could help our partners at FSA by knowing a little bit more about how best to help them in responding to requests that a lot of our producers have year after year, regardless of what emergency situations they might confront. It's either drought or flooding or both at the same time. And it seems like, every time we run into a situation, it's just a little bit unique and requires a different approach. And I really appreciate the foresight that went into putting together a webinar like this to put all the information in one place, because I can tell you, I've been doing this for quite some time, and you would think that I would know a little bit better about how to approach these disaster declarations and being able to explain emergency program alternatives for our ag producers, and I'm not as good at that as I should be. And so I think a webinar like this can be very helpful to try to put all the information into a pile. And I really appreciate FSA's patience with me, because I ask the same questions year after year. And I think they think they're telling me the same answer, and they probably are, but I'm hearing it differently. But the one thing that I do take from those conversations year after year is the importance of documentation and being able to do that from the beginning, and reaching out to your local FSA offices first, and trying to get, some coordination going on at that local level first. And so I also, like Kate did, have to thank my state FSA offices and my county service centers for answering a laundry list of different questions about process. And I really appreciate Colorado inviting me to be a part of this today, because it's something that I think is very necessary, and I'm hoping that I can learn a lot from it as well, and hopefully become a little bit more reliable and an informed partner in the future. So thank you for the opportunity.
Administrator Ducheneaux.
Good afternoon, everybody, and thanks for taking some time out of your busy schedules for this. Thanks to Commissioner Greenberg and Miyamoto for having us out. And thanks to the local team for doing a good job helping us understand what our producers are needing. Commissioner Miyamoto, don't take it personally that you feel like you have to ask the same question. The answers change. And if you feel like you're getting the same answers that you got 2 or 3 years ago, we want to know, because we are making improvements in these programs. We're doing our best to push the boundaries on this, especially with regard to the livestock programs. Secretary has given us the kick in the pants and said, get out there and find the gaps, fill the gaps. Fix the things that you can, find the flexibilities that you can exercise. And prior to Acting Deputy Administrator Burge being on, Scott Marlowe led us down that road very well. We look forward to continuing to find the flexibility and find ways that we can help producers navigate this. And as we make these accommodations, we're making them permanent so producers can then know when things are going bad, there's going to be some assistance that can come. Because that's the toughest thing. I've been in the shoes of all the producers out there myself before. When you're out there dragging calves out of a ditch or uncovering something out of the snow that you didn't understand was there when the blizzard hit, the last thing you want to be worrying about is how the hell I'm going to figure this out. So we're putting together a toolbox that better serves our livestock producers so that we can start to bring some parity in those programs. And I'll pass it back to Dan, but we look forward to the conversation. We look forward to hearing the presentations, and thanks for having us.
Thank you, sir. And is Deputy Administrator Burge, is he with us?
I saw his
believe-
name in the list there, but he might not be
Okay.
speaking.
Well, we
Might need to be
appreciate,
promoted to panelist.
well, we appreciate him being here and supporting us as well. I think we'll go into the presentations. Just a reminder, this is recorded. We will post this on the CDA webpage in the very near future. And if you have any questions for the Q&A and discussion at the end, please put those in the chat for Sonia and I. And with that, Janae, we'll start with you. Thank you.
Next slide, please. Perfect, thank you. Good afternoon, I'm Janae Rader. I am the State Farm Program Specialist for Disaster Programs with the Farm Service Agency. Today, I want to give you guys a brief overview of some of the programs available. This is not an all-inclusive list, and I do encourage you to contact your county office or visit the fsa.usda.gov website for additional programs and information. I've focused on the programs that we felt would benefit the Colorado producers who've recently suffered losses due to the drought and winter storms. But keep in mind, we have plenty of other programs out there that might fit your situation. I'm going to go over these programs with a high level, and you can find additional information on these programs by pulling up the fact sheets available on the fsa.usda.gov website. I've listed them here in blue, and I believe Sonia is going to be posting them in the link or in the chat as well. Next slide. I'd like to start out with LFP. LFP is a livestock program. You must have control and risk in both the livestock and the grazing acres. Only weaned livestock are eligible, and they must have been normally grazing the non-irrigated grazing acres had there not been a disaster event. Eligible acres will include not only native pasture, but improved pastures, small grains, foraged sorghum, and mixed forages. They must be certified with the intended use of grazing, and at this time, only acres certified with the non-irrigated intended use are eligible. LFP is triggered off of the drought monitor. The drought monitor must meet the minimum criteria of either D2 or greater for 8 weeks during the grazing period, or D3 or greater anytime during the grazing period to trigger a loss. The Colorado grazing periods were set off the last frost freeze date for the county. That's the beginning of the growing period, and they're going to be different for each county. So please contact your county office for those specific dates. The deadline to apply for LFP is 30 calendar days after the end of the calendar year in which the loss occurred. So January 30th of the following year. Next slide. LIP is a livestock indemnity program, and it covers death loss or severely injured livestock due to an eligible disaster event. Eligible events include abnormal adverse weather, such as the storms we recently had hit Colorado, northern and parts of the southern. It includes eligible attacks. However, I want you to keep in mind for those eligible attacks, they must be confirmed kills. FSA only provides assistance on death loss that exceeds normal mortality. Often these extreme storms are going to kill your livestock at the end of the year. If you don't have good records documenting your normal death loss, which may have occurred prior to the disaster event, your assistance may be reduced. I believe Frank's going to cover other benefits for keeping good records later on, but it's very beneficial in this program. As the most of our disaster programs, there's a requirement to file a notice of loss. LIP requires the notice of loss to be filed within 30 days of when the loss is first apparent. And you must also file an application for payment. With LIP, it's 60 calendar days after the end of the year that the loss occurred as well. Next slide. With ELAP, ELAP is emergency assistance for livestock, honeybees, and farm-raised fish. This program has multiple little programs. As he had mentioned earlier, we're trying to fill the gaps here. Today, we're only going to cover a couple of these programs. I'm going to talk about the additional feed purchased above normal quantities and the transportation. Next slide. ELAP has some of the same deadline requirements for its programs. That is that losses are based on the calendar year from January 1 to December 31. And for livestock, the notice of loss must be filed within 30 days of when the loss is apparent. As with any of our programs, if you're outside of those 30 days, please contact your county office for eligibility. There may be some exceptions or late file options available for you to apply. Note, in this one, the honeybee losses need to be reported within 15 calendar days, not the 30 required for the livestock. In addition to the notice of loss, you need to file an application for payment. That needs to be no later than January 30th after the end of the year in which the loss occurred. Next slide. ELAP covers the cost of purchasing additional feed above normal quantities. Remember, they must be eligible livestock and an eligible disaster event. The payment will not exceed the feed needs for 150 calendar days for the eligible livestock. And for additional feed purchase, the eligible disaster event does not have to happen during the normal grazing period, like other programs such as the LFP or ELAP transportation. The additional feed does not need to be purchased during the grazing season either. Additional feed purchases will not be eligible if you're receiving compensation under another grazing loss for the same livestock and the same loss condition. If you have additional feed purchased, you may also be eligible for the additional cost related with snow removal. The snow removal is only eligible if you qualify for the additional feed purchased above normal quantities. Next slide. ELAP also covers transportation costs due to eligible weather events. The additional cost of transporting water may be eligible due to drought. Water transported must be to lands that normally do not require you to haul water. And there's a single national price of 7 cents a gallon times a national payment factor. And these benefits will not exceed the livestock needs of 150 calendar days. Next slide. We also have livestock transportation. This was added a couple years ago. This is going to reimburse producers with additional costs for transporting feed to livestock as well as the livestock to feed, and it's due to an eligible drought. The eligible drought is based on the drought monitor. Again, it's going to need to meet the minimum criteria of D2 or greater for 8 weeks or D3 or greater anytime during the grazing period with a trigger, will trigger a loss. So only transportation after an eligible drought has triggered and is apparent is going to be eligible. You're going to certify your normal mileage and your disaster year mileage. There's going to be a local mileage reduction of 25 miles, and it's going to be capped at 1,000 miles a load. Empty miles are not eligible. For 2023, the payment rate was $6.60 per loaded mile times the national payment factor. That national payment factor is the same for all of our ELAP programs. It's 60%, which would make $3.96 per loaded mile, or it's 90% if you've certified as an underserved producer on the CCC 860, which would make it $5.94 per loaded mile. These rates just came out this week. Next slide. We're going to move in a little different direction here with NAP. NAP covers weather-related crop production losses. Previously, we'd been talking mostly livestock losses. NAP only covers crop losses. A producer must obtain a policy. Policies have administrative fee of $325 per crop with a maximum of $825 per county. But if you're a multi-county producer, your fees are not going to exceed $1,875. Underserved producers will receive that basic coverage for free as the fee is waived. Producers must request a policy and/or file an application for payment. There's recently been some exceptions for 22 NAP. There's two main types of coverage available. We have basic coverage, which is a CAT level coverage. It covers a 50% production loss at a 55% price. And then there's buy-up. The buy-up producers can choose buy-up on all crops except those for grazing. Grazing crops are only eligible for basic coverage. Buy-up can be purchased with production coverage ranging from 50 to 65% in increments of 5 and at 100% price levels. Producers with buy-up will have an additional premium of 5.25% of the guarantee, and the premium is going to be reduced 50% for those underserved producers. In addition to obtaining a policy, the producers must file that notice of loss. For NAP, it's within 15 calendar days of when the disaster becomes apparent, and they have to file that application for payment. The application for payment is due within 60 calendar days of the last day of coverage. Next slide. The next two programs I want to mention are not tied to the recent disaster events we have. However, FSA is currently taking applications, and we wanted to make sure you knew that they were available. These programs are going to be revenue-based programs, and this is kind of a new concept to FSA. ERP, which is Emergency Relief Program, covers crop losses. It covers losses with disaster events occurring in calendar years 2020 and 2021. We're administering this program in 2 phases. The first phase is over, and producers were mailed pre-filled applications based on data that was already on file with FSA and or RMA. And phase 2 is what we're currently in, and it's revenue-based portion, where producers are going to be comparing a benchmark year of either their choice, 18 or 19, with revenue tied to the eligible crops in 2021. Only revenue tied to the eligible crop is included, and producers are really going to want to pull those fact sheets from the FSA website and walk through them step by step. The deadline for ERP is June 2nd, 2023. Next slide. HARP. HARP is a pandemic assistance program, and it's also revenue-based. However, PARP includes livestock where ERP did not. The revenue used for this program may be different than the revenue for ERP, so please pull that fact sheet and walk through them. PARP only covers the 2020 program year, and a producer must suffer a 15% decrease in eligible revenue to qualify for a payment. You're going to compare your 20 revenue with your choice of either the 2018 or 2019 revenue. The application deadline for this program is also June 2nd, 2023. Next slide. Before I hand this over to Mike, I wanted to cover our pay limits for the programs that we just covered. So ELAP, LFP, and LIP are going to be combined into $125,000 limit. NAP is going to have 2 limits. You're going to have $125,000 for your basic coverage and then $300,000 for buy-up. ERP is going to be split up by revenue types, specialty and non-specialty crops. We didn't have time to get to that level of detail, but I did want you to know that they are separate and that ERP also has an option to apply for an additional limit if 75% of your adjusted gross income is from farming, ranching, and forestry. PARP also has a $125,000 limit. I really encourage you guys to contact your local county office, even if you feel you're outside of the window to timely file these notice of losses or applications for payment. And to pull up those fact sheets on our website, they have a lot more detail about the programs than we were able to cover today. And that's what I have, Dan. Thank you.
Mike, we'll have you go, and then we'll ask the acting deputy administrator for his comments.
Okay, sounds good. Good afternoon. My name is Mike Steffen. I'm the Chief of Farm Loan Programs at the Colorado Farm Service Agency. I'm going to visit today about USDA disaster designations. We're going to see the types of designations, discuss how the process works, and what the benefits of the designations are. I'm also going to spend a little time and talk briefly about the FSA loan programs. So USDA disaster designations, all disaster designations within USDA FSA cover losses caused by natural disasters. The county where the natural disaster is documented is the primary county, and each bordering county is designated as a contiguous county. The benefits of having a disaster designation within FSA are eligibility for emergency loans and additional servicing options for existing borrowers. Loan and servicing programs triggered by any designation are available equally in primary and contiguous counties. And the programs that Janae has spoken of do not require disaster designation, and they have their independent triggers that she mentioned. Next slide. Most of the disaster designations we see are secretarial disaster designations. This covers crop production losses due to most types of natural disaster and can be triggered with a 30% loss to at least one crop in the county. The process typically begins at the local level with the staff recognizing an event and or recording an event reported by producers. Once that 30% loss threshold on a crop can be documented, the county emergency board convenes, will send a recommendation to the state emergency board, and then the state emergency board makes a recommendation to the governor, who then sends a request to the Secretary of Agriculture. That process can actually begin at any one of those steps, but each step will be covered by the time the designation is effective. You would commonly see this type of designation with something like hail or freeze, but it can be used for other natural disasters that cause damage to crops. Next slide. It does seem a little odd to talk about drought as we listen to it rain and see pictures of flooding from the snow melt, but our most common disaster designations are drought related. And because of that, for drought, we now have a process called fast track designation. This is triggered by the drought monitor, does not require the local documentation and recommendations. We've recently received 2 primary fast track designations for Colorado counties and added 6 more designations for contiguous counties based on drought designations in neighboring states. So right now, a total of 47 counties in Colorado have a drought designation for 2023. Next slide. While these crop production losses are covered under the secretarial designation, death of livestock and destruction of buildings, barns, and equipment are covered as physical losses under the administrator's physical loss notification. This process begins at the local office where the staff documents reports of losses and works with the state office to document the damage. If a notification is needed, the state executive director will send a request to the administrator for approval. And we might see a secretarial disaster designation and an administrator's physical loss notification for the same natural disaster, depending on the type of loss. A hailstorm, for example, might cause 30% damage to the corn crop in the county to generate a secretarial disaster designation, and also cause livestock death or damage to buildings, which could trigger the administrator's physical loss notification. And as we talk about these 2 different types of disaster designations, the biggest takeaway I would suggest is for you to report your concerns to the local office. If something's going on out there, we may or may not know about it. So that's how we know the severity of the natural event and helps us track the amount of loss occurring and begin the process of requesting a designation if it's appropriate. And it's also a good time to file that notice of loss that Janae mentioned for several of her programs. Next slide. Presidential declarations are for much more widespread events and are triggered by FEMA declarations. Really not going to spend any time on it, as Jim Raymond's going to talk a little bit more about that in a few minutes. We'd kind of finish up the designation and declaration part of this by saying each of these designations generates similar eligibility for emergency loans. The actual losses are calculated based on the type of designation and loss. And for crop production losses under a secretarial designation, the individual would also meet the 30% loss threshold on a crop basic to their operation to be eligible for emergency loans. Next slide. Kind of like the programs that Janae talked about, there's no way to fully discuss the FSA loan programs in this short time frame, so I'm going to hit it on a very high level. In addition to the emergency loans available with disaster designations, we make and service farm operating loans and farm ownership loans in FSA. Operating loan funds can be used for annual operating purposes, livestock purchases, and equipment purchases, and we can also serve some of the same purposes as emergency loans in overcoming a disaster. Farm ownership loan funds can be used for the purchase of farms and ranches. We serve family-sized farmers and ranchers who are unable to obtain the necessary credit from commercial lenders. The loans are administered through direct lending, or we work with local lenders to provide guaranteed loans. We're not competing with the local lenders, and in fact, we often work closely with them to meet the full credit needs of our customers. Next slide. I want to finish up with just some opportunities to go find some of that FSA farm loan information. Since I was really only able to hit the high points regarding the FSA loans, the fact sheets that link that was loaded while Janae was talking will include the information on the loan programs. FSA.usda.gov also has a link to search states and counties for your local FSA contact, including the appropriate farm loan team. We have 37 offices in FSA in Colorado. We have farm loan teams located in 8 of those offices, but we all work together. If you want to reach out to me directly, just send me an email and let me know where your location is, and I'll get you in contact with the farm loan team that serves your county. We do encourage use of the new loan assistance tool that's listed there, which will step you through an eligibility self-assessment and provide the documents needed for a loan application. Appreciate you taking the time to participate in this webinar today. We hope it helps to navigate the options available for dealing with natural disasters. Feel free to reach out with any questions you may have. That's all I have, Dan.
Thanks, Mike. And we'll finish the FSA portion with comments from Acting Deputy Administrator for Farm Programs, John Burge.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm sorry about my my camera's all messed up too. Sorry about the delay in getting in front of you this afternoon. I appreciate the time. I don't mean to take too much time because I know that there's probably a lot of questions. I just want to highlight a couple of things. First of all, the presenters from Colorado FSA, terrific job. You took away a lot of the thunder in the remarks that I had for myself, highlighting a lot of the enhancements that we just recently have made, particularly on the livestock front, with both livestock indemnity and ELAP. I know that there was also a little bit of talk about the emergency conservation program as it relates to disasters that you all have experienced, not just in terms of this most recent winter that you're dealing with, but also in terms of the drought and the resulting wildfires of the previous few years. And I will tell you that that program is enormously important and one that we have a good deal of flexibility with. You know, Zach mentioned that the Secretary has asked us to find gaps and fill them. There are ways that we've done that in ELAP and LIP. There are ways that we have been doing that in ECP, particularly as it relates to extensions, working through the site inspection process with the county committees, also in working through the programmatic 850 waivers where they are possible to get some of those recoveries on the ground quickly. So I want to point that out because we're trying to be responsive. We're trying to be nimble in reacting to some of the disasters on the ground in Colorado and elsewhere. But a lot of that is coming from interactions like this, where somebody may say something that ends up being a terrific idea and ends up becoming policy. So I want to encourage you all, even after this webinar, to stay in touch with us, stay in touch with your state office so that we can be responsive to the needs. I thank you to the Colorado Department of Ag. Thanks, Dan, for allowing me the time, and I'll just wait and listen for questions.
Great. Thank you, sir. We'll move on to our Small Business Administration. Cynthia?
Good afternoon. My name is Cynthia Cowell. I'm a Public Information Officer with the Small Business Administration, Office of Disaster Recovery and Resilience. There is a current Secretary of Agriculture declaration for Colorado for the drought. And that's the drought that occurred beginning November 1st of 2022. When the Secretary of Agriculture makes a declaration for an agricultural crisis, then that activates the SBA economic injury disaster loans. These loans are available to small non-farm businesses. We won't be able to help the people that are producing the hay, but the truckers who haul the hay could get help from SBA if they suffered losses because of that. SBA can loan up to $2 million for the economic losses to a non-farm business or to an aquacultural business or agricultural cooperatives. The interest rate for the current declaration is 3.305% for a business or 2.375% for private nonprofit organizations. And we recommend that if a business has suffered losses because of the ongoing drought, then they can apply online at disasterloanassistance.sba.gov. You can also call our customer service center at 800-659-2955 or email any questions to disastercustomerservice@sba.gov. And I'll put that in the chat when we're done. With that, I will stay on the line pending any questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Cynthia. And now we're going to Department of Natural Resources.
Thanks, Dan. So my name is Anna Moss. I'm with the Colorado Water Conservation Board. We are a division within the Department of Natural Resources, really focused on water policy and planning. So I guess I'll open with, we are typically not an emergency response agency, so we don't have a lot of programs that address this. However, we do have one that is very specific to augmentation water when there is a drought declaration. And so it's our Agricultural Emergency Drought Response Program. This is available when there has been a drought declaration in a portion of Colorado. When that occurs, it frees up $1 million on an annual basis for agricultural organizations for emergency drought-related augmentation water purposes. And I can also drop a link in the chat to our webpage on this, and it has a good outline of our guidelines for that program. But the crux of the program really is to look at that cost of the drought and what was the additional augmentation water need. So it's not just an organization's annual augmentation water, but really what was that spike in cost related to the drought and what did that really cost? And so we accept applications annually on January 1st, and that is for the prior irrigation season. And then we try to work quickly to review those and make awards as soon as we can. We did make an exception for this year. We've extended our deadline to May 1st for anything that happened in the last calendar year. So if anyone's got questions on that, if you think you might have been eligible, certainly feel free to reach out to me. The person who normally handles this program, her name is Nora Flynn. She is our ag specialist at the CWCB. She is out on maternity leave right now, kind of coming back a day or two a week here and there. But I think you'll have my contact information too, so you can always reach out to me if you've got questions, if you can't get a hold of Nora. So that's kind of the high level program, and I'll stick around later for questions too. Thanks, Dan.
Thanks, Anna. We appreciate all the good collaboration between CDA and DNR. And now we're on to our partner, Recovery Officer Jim Raymond.
Okay, thanks, Dan, and good afternoon, everybody. It's really nice to be here to just make sure that we kind of complete the information cycle when we talk about disaster declarations and particularly recovery from those disasters that affect any of our states. I work in the Department of Public Safety for the Division of Homeland Security and Emergency Management, and as such, we are focused on really all the different aspects of emergency management, response, recovery, preparedness, mitigation. And are predominantly responsible for helping to provide that disaster assistance right after a disaster. And one of the major federal agencies that we work with at the state is FEMA. And it's important to talk a little bit about that, because although the FEMA programs don't directly provide eligibility for agricultural losses, it's definitely important that they tie back to what the disaster impacts have been. And as well, they impact Coloradans just as a matter of the fact that they're residents here in the state. And so the Federal Stafford Act really allows for the president to declare a major disaster at the request of the governor when the needs of the communities and of the state have been overwhelmed by a disaster. And you see a couple of images here. These are both from Colorado, from Larimer County and Boulder County. And they provide a number of different programs. And I think one of the things that's really important to understand first is that there isn't a one-size-fits-all disaster declaration or award given to Colorado. Colorado's received about 5 presidential declarations since 2012. So they don't come around every year, but you know, I'm sure most of the folks on the call can name some of the larger floods or fires that we've had in Colorado that have received those disaster declarations. And really each one of them has been slightly different in what the needs are for Colorado and the awards that have been given by the president and then through FEMA as a result. And then, as we've mentioned here before, both through USDA and the Small Business Administration, that also can trigger some of those programs. So this is really a network of disaster assistance, and this is an important part of it. So we talked about 2 of the primary programs that you've heard about or you've read about, and I'll just give a quick 30-second explanation of what they are. On the left side of your screen, you see a bridge that's been destroyed or damaged, and that really would fall under the potential eligibility for a FEMA public assistance program. And that's really for governments that have had damage to uninsured buildings or infrastructure. And there as well, you can see a road. On the right side of your screen is an example of really both the individual assistance program, which really provides assistance for primary homeowners who experience uninsured damage or destruction of their primary homes, and some other assistance to individuals that are in that disaster declaration area. But really on that right side of the screen, you can see both programs in action, right? That was a presidential disaster, or it was a major disaster for both PA and IA. And so you see damage to the roadway, which would be at the expense of that local government, and damage to a primary home as well, that both would be eligible for those. So next slide, we'll continue the conversation a little bit. The state of Colorado, through the Division of Homeland Security and Emergency Management, manages these programs or administers parts of them jointly with FEMA through a coordinated joint field office. So FEMA provides a lot of funding and assistance, and the state provides coordination to provide the funding down to those communities that might need that. It is declared on a county by county basis. So if a request for a presidential major disaster declaration goes up to the president from the governor, it's made based on that, really the county boundary and all the communities within that. And so that's really important to understand. Another program that is very important to understand too, that can get awarded during a major disaster declaration, and also has elements that are available on an annual basis, and that's the mitigation program. The state of Colorado also manages or coordinates that with FEMA to provide grants to communities to help prevent disasters. And that's encompasses a wide variety, very wide array of different disasters, and how can we try to mitigate that so that the disaster doesn't happen in the first place. And like I mentioned, so those are kind of the 3 major programs that a major disaster declaration would get. That's the PA, public assistance, the individual assistance, and of course the mitigation programs. And like I mentioned, even though agricultural losses aren't specific damage category, it's still very important to tell the story for those Coloradans or those communities that have suffered those losses. For rural electric cooperatives and others, it's very important that we explain the consequences and the impact to Colorado when we make that request and we do those damage assessments. And agriculture is a very important part of that. These types of disaster declarations happen very quickly. And really the governor has 30 days from the date of the damage or the date of the disaster to survey the damage, document those damages, calculate up what those costs are, and get that off to the president in a letter requesting a presidential disaster declaration. And as a result of that, then they can be awarded that. The other thing that I wanted to mention as well is the state of Colorado also is, your local emergency manager in each one of your counties in Colorado and Wyoming are a very important part of your point of contact for providing some of that disaster relief and elevating some of these issues to the State Office of Emergency Management for inclusion into a major disaster declaration. And it's very important to provide that level of impact and damage up to those offices. Because even if a major disaster declaration is not awarded, the state is still actively looking and coordinating with all of our partners to make sure that we can provide some of that disaster relief. In Colorado, we have a state recovery task force that's made up of state and federal agencies, because recovery from any of these disasters, whether it's a fire or flood or any of these other disasters you can think of, all require a team effort across all the departments in Colorado and all the agencies to provide recovery. It's a long haul to recover from a fire or a flood, and we try to pull all that information together so we can share that with the agencies that are really providing that recovery on the ground. That's all I have, Dan, and I'll stick around for some questions, but thanks very much.
Thanks a lot, Jim. Our final presenter is Dr. Frank Gehry, my favorite professor at my alma mater, Colorado State University.
Well, so want to switch. Well, thank you, Dan. And first, thanks to everybody for attending. Just want to share a few thoughts as I get started on this. I'm been asked to talk about record keeping and documentation. I think first we need to recognize that just a few years ago, there were none of these programs available to livestock producers. And so I think we have a lot to be grateful for the fact that now we have new avenues to potentially help mitigate some of the losses that can occur when untoward events occur. But they also then carry with them a stipulation that you need to be able to participate properly with the system and have some kind of documentation. So I'll share a different thought with you, which is that preparing for these kinds of disasters is kind of a weird thing for a Joe normal person that's not involved in emergency management. Let's face it. How many people listening to this call actually have 2 weeks of canned goods stored in their pantry in the event that a blizzard occurs so that they can't get to the grocery store for 2 weeks? And the answer is not too many, because it's not the way most people behave. And so when we look at things like documenting losses, a lot of people aren't all that well prepared for those kind of things. And so I'm going to encourage you to look at it through a different lens. This is similar to the issue of the Arkansas Traveler and the Bluegrass song, where you come across somebody whose roof is leaking and you say, well, why don't you fix your roof? Say, well, because it's pouring rain outside. I can't fix the roof now. Well, why don't you fix the roof when it's sun shining out? Well, it doesn't leak then. And that's the way a lot of people approach these types of things. I think you need to look at record keeping for what it really is, which is an essential component of good business management, which is just a part of saying, I like my operation, I like doing what I do, and I want it to work really well. If you're going to do that and you want to make management changes or you want to improve it, then you need good records. You need the opportunity to be able to see where you are, where you're going, what you're doing. If you do that and you approach this as a component of your normal business day-to-day management practices, then you have everything you need, because it's also necessary to receive compensation for losses. And how do I know this? Because I actually interface with a fair number of people under bad situations where they have calf losses or disease or problems. And when I ask about demographics of the herd or what number of animals are affected by certain problems, it's actually really difficult for most people to help me help them. What I need is certain information, or I can't actually do what I'm good at doing. And a lot of people just really don't have that. That's despite the fact that the tools for maintaining good records are readily available. Over on the right-hand side, you see the little red books that anybody in the cow-calf industry is very familiar with. They're sold for $7.50, come out new each year from NCBA. They've been available for almost 40 years. They're easy to keep. A lot of people do keep them. But when we look at them, the record keeping is not systematic. It's not up to date. It's not really ready for what is required in order to help FSA help you. And I think there's a lot of reasons for that. And I believe it's because of the wide variation in the nature of livestock operations in general. We have some operations that are very intensively managed, confined feeding operations. They have records that are typically computerized and ready to go anytime. And then we have the more extensively managed, say, range operations, where people easily see that, oh, I think I know what's happening here, and then fail to keep those records. Or maybe it's because it's a small scale operation as opposed to large scale. And it would probably be true. If you only have 3 animals on your operation, it's not very hard to keep records. But as soon as you move to 40 or 50 or 100 or multiple hundreds, this becomes a much more difficult task. And in fact, nobody can do that in their head. That's just not possible. So either you make a commitment to keeping good records so you know what's going on, or you probably won't have very accurate information, right? And there's also the issue of non-commercial operations. There's a lot of operations that are things that people do because they really love to do it, but it's not their primary source of income. And so they get sloppy about certain types of things that run that operation like a really good business. So I want to encourage you to look at the fact that you own animals as something that you want to be high quality, maintain records, and then you're ready. It's just part of doing good work, because that documentation is required to establish the magnitude of the loss. And for a good comparison, if you've ever been audited for your tax records, that probably doesn't happen every year. Then all of a sudden you realize the value of having receipts and documentation. Otherwise, you've got a problem. Or perhaps getting compensated for insured losses, which is very analogous to what these kind of programs do. And if you get a hailstorm that damages your roof, it's going to be hard to argue with the insurance company who you've paid money to that you have a 3-year-old roof because you have the receipts to prove that that's true, rather than the 40-year roof, which is what you were originally insured 40 years ago. So you need that kind of documentation, and it's really not that complicated, and we have the tools to do it, but they need to be maintained and updated over time. So Dan, the next slide. Aside from my own personal experience, there are also surveys that look at the level of record keeping done by different sectors of the livestock systems. And this is a 2022 survey that was conducted for cow-calf producers. And so it's interesting that over 95% of all the producers surveyed across the country recognized easily that cattle records are a key component to managing your animals to improve health, productivity, and performance. And yet of that, only 87% kept any kind of health records whatsoever. And of that, only 63% of them had only handwritten records. Now, handwritten records are good. They're convenient, they're handy, you can carry it around in your pocket. And the great news is it's a paper trail that says what happened. So it's good. Those are important. But they're difficult to query, to summarize, to analyze. And when you're facing an emergency type of problem and you're asked to compile these into usable records, that's just one more really difficult task to do at the time. So the most useful way to keep records is to maintain some handwritten records and convert them to an electronic or perhaps a spreadsheet format. And these days, and as you keep moving along, that becomes easier and easier. If you can't do it or you don't want to do it, not hard to hire a high school student who probably has computer capabilities that will blow your socks off. So it's not very hard to make this happen. On top of that, there are some commercially available software packages. And as we move towards the next gen, you can take a wand with an electronic ID and it'll actually keep track of those records for you directly, real time, that are really accurate. So there are ways to make this happen that are actually very effective within a business, a well-run business. Next slide, Dan. What I really want to leave you with is a recognition of what those records are that we're talking about. And they're very simple. They're actually the baseline records of any good business enterprise. First of all is inventory. You have to know the inventory, and it has to include the diversity of what that inventory represents, which is animals of all ages, all classes, and enumerate who and where they are. Second, you need purchases and receipts, whether it's of the animals or the things that go to the animal management, which a good business should manage and maintain. It's not that hard. You just need an organizational system. Then you need location, because of course that's really critical for knowing where the animals are, what circumstances they're experiencing, and so on. And those will be very important for these types of compensation claims, as well as the normal background losses. So if you have those, then it becomes easy to justify to the FSA, here are the losses that occurred before this disaster, and here are the losses that are occurring now. And the FSA can easily see that these are valid records because they're up to date, maintained, and accurate. You would want calving dates and gender of the animals because that's what you will get compensated for, is for the different classes of animals. And you need to be able to associate the identity of the dam and the calf. So those are really the core key records that you would need for this purpose. But I will suggest, partly because I'm a veterinarian, that there are other good records that are useful for you for cattle health. And if you maintain them, it helps validate that you actually are paying attention to how those animals are managed, which numbers there are, and so on. Those would be things like vaccines administered, breeding dates, weaning weights, mature cow body condition, and the feed inventory and its characteristics. And so with that cassette of normal business management records, it will be easy to work with FSA, who is empowered and actually would really like to help you out, which is something that even a few years ago, we really didn't have. And so that was really the message I wanted to send you. Again, I'll thank you for attending. I'm happy to answer some questions about this, but I hope that gave you an overview of an approach and an attitude that would allow you to be able to work with FSA at any time relatively easily. And thanks for your attention.
Thanks, Frank. Sonia, we're going to go into the Q&A discussion part now.
Let's do that. I'm going to grab one from the chat that came in first, and that was James Mars. He asks, has there been a decision on how much will be paid in the PARP and EPR?
At this point, they are going to set a payment factor after the end of sign up. They have a specific amount that is dedicated to this program. So as soon as sign up's over, or at the end of January or June 2nd, they'll set that payment factor.
Thank you, Janae. Gary Brightbill, I just wanted to go ahead and answer your question. Yes, there will be, we will be making this recording available to everyone after the webinar. Okay, so be on the lookout for that. We should, we'll go ahead and send that out to you. Steve, how is the end of the assistance period decided?
I think we'll need a little more information, Steve, on what program you are asking about assistance.
Hold on just a second. I'm going to go ahead and let him tell us. Steve, you can unmute yourself, I think.
I was talking about the winter event and ELAP.
So the ELAP additional feed purchased ends when additional feed becomes available. We know it's probably going to end at least the beginning of the grazing season, but it's really in policy when additional feed becomes available.
Okay. Wait till the next one.
Okay, and Galen asks regarding, Oh, actually, we must have answered that question. Jelaine wants to know, would you please comment on what Colorado Department of Agriculture and Governor Polis is doing to support Senator Bennett in raising the issue that the Conservation Reserve Program rates have become adverse to conservation where it is needed most, particularly in the heart of the Dust Bowl in southeastern Colorado. Now in a historic drought, we are now approaching another dirty 30s as CRP rates. Hold on just a second. I think, let me let Kate. Kate?
Great,
have
thank you,
your-
Sonia.
Okay, sorry about that.
Yeah, no, you're good. And thanks for that question, Jelaine. Absolutely, and we've received your comments and letters and appreciate you forwarding those to us. So whenever we get those, we communicate those with Governor Polis, the governor's office, as well as Senator Bennett and our federal delegation. So we're all very aware of your concerns. So happy to follow up after this, but just know that we have received those and certainly something to dive more into across our delegation and across the state.
Yeah, our next question is, what happens to the operation who not only has the crop loss that then is utilized as a winter forage for their livestock? They have a loss of crop inputs and have increased costs for their livestock operation. What happens to the operation who not only has the crop loss that then is utilized as a winter forage for their livestock is the question.
This is Jenny. I'm not 100% sure I'm understanding the question, but I believe the question is asking on additional feed purchased, if you produced your own feed and you had to feed it rather than purchase additional feed, what happens to those producers? And at this point, they're not eligible. If I misunderstood that question, we may need to clarify that.
Janae, this is Travis Taylor, and I think that's my question, because the majority of producers that I deal with out here raise their winter forages. They lose those, but then when they lose those, they have the added expense of buying forages. So they have double the loss that someone who's not raising their own forages has.
Yeah, maybe.
I mean, my question is on the double dipping, if they're on a crop side, and can they then file for the livestock side because they haven't had those forage costs in the past?
So they can apply for NAP and they would be eligible for that, but that additional feed purchased, unless, I know you're out not being able to sell that, but unless you actually have proof of purchasing additional feed above normal quantities, then you're not going to be able to claim that. Now you would still be eligible on your grazing acres for the disaster, but not as far as the actual feed grown and then not able to sell at this point.
Well, it's pretty easy to prove that, because normally we don't buy feed, we raise our own. So any feed bought would be logged as a normal purchase, an abnormal purchase, I should say. But we've already recovered some loss in the NAP. My question is on the double dipping in both of those programs, are they eligible? Because they do have double the loss.
Travis, this is John. Janae, I think what you're saying is correct as it stands today. But we are working on a policy change on this, Travis, and I hate to say stay tuned, but I'm going to say stay tuned. This is an issue not just in Colorado, but in a good chunk of the West. And I think that we're going to get pretty close to what it is you're after. So Kate, I don't know if it would be possible just to communicate back with you once we get to that point, but perhaps you could share that with this team. That would be terrific. I would love to give you more information, but I don't want to get out over my skis because it's something that is still being worked out. So thank you.
And I should mention, Travis has been a great partner to CDA out in the Eastern Colorado areas. So we'll definitely be able to pass on information to him.
Looks like I have a question from Kenny Rogers. I'm going to go ahead and let him ask his question.
All right. Yeah, I'm going to kind of tag on to Travis's question there because this is something I've been speaking with Kate about. You know, we're grazing our cattle out here in Northeast Colorado on corn stalks until, well, even about this time of year. This year, many of us pulled off of those corn stalks and had to start feeding as early I did the end of January, which I was looking at having some feed stocks carryover regarding hay and silage. And I just bought 3 semi-loads of hay the other day just to carry me through, and we're still a ways away from green grass yet. So I'm looking at all these programs trying to figure out exactly where this is going to fit in. I mean, we've got feed that I typically would have had that I raised myself, and now I'm, like I said, I'm always supplementing that in buying more hay, and it's hard to find and it's darn expensive, I might add. Then of course there was the stress and the strain on the livestock themselves, death loss of newborn calves, just fighting that all winter. I'm concerned already about breed back on the cows just due to the stress we saw on them. Something else hadn't been mentioned yet, and I've been speaking with some people in the know on that at Rocky Mountain Sire, plus a couple of vets. Guys are going to start looking at fertility testing. Their bulls are going to get whacked on that, and a bull that probably typically would have made it through the winter in good shape, now they're unfertile, are going to be shipped. They're going to have to be buying more bulls. I mean, it's just a magnitude of problems. So I'm kind of wondering which one of these if we file for one, are we not eligible for another, or can we kind of tag on to a multitude of these? So I'll look forward to your response on that.
Denny, that's a real good question. I'll go ahead and jump in here. You know, these programs are evolving. As was mentioned earlier, they didn't exist just a decade ago. So the changes that we've been making, we're pushing the bounds of the existing authorities, and we're trying to find those bounds. You asked some very good questions about some things that frankly hadn't come up because we hadn't created this model for assistance through ELAP until this year. So we're going to have to take your information and add it to the list of things that we're trying to find a way to reach out to, so that we can make sure that we're filling those gaps under the charge of the secretary like he's given us. Please reach out to me via email and share all of that with me so that we can get the particulars, and I can get with John and his team to try to work out some solutions that may work out for you. Understand that where we have a regulation that gives us the flexibility within that regulation to exercise some discretion, we're pushing. Some of the other fixes where we have a statutory authority, where a regulation change is needed, we might be a little ways down the road before we can make that change, but that doesn't mean that it's not valuable for us to share, to have you share where we're missing the mark so we can think about those changes going forward. Unfortunately, we're going to miss as we develop these programs in some cases, but it's not for a lack of trying. It's just for the fact that the disaster in California is different than the one that happened in Kansas, and is different than the one that happens in Colorado. And we're trying to push the boundaries to fill all of those separate gaps. So please keep sharing your information and be thinking about what, you know, you mentioned the bulls that have frozen their reproductive organs and may be damaged. We don't have a prevented planting mechanism for our livestock producers. All of ours starts after that year of production has happened. So be thinking about that, and as conversations come up with your congressional delegation, you have the opportunity to share with them, hey, there are some shortcomings yet in our livestock programs to really get us to parity with our friends in the crop industry. So I hope that helps some. I look forward to more conversations with you all about how we can continue to improve these.
And then it looks like the acting deputy administrator answered a couple of Steve's questions in writing. I don't, Sonia, can you see those, or you want me to read
I
those?
can. Would you like me to read through them? I can read through them. I have one more question that popped in from Laura. We provide custom grazing whereby we do all management of the cattle and pasture and are paid by the AUM. We have ownership or lease control of the grass acres and are listed as producer operator with FSA, but do not own the cattle. What programs are we eligible for with forage loss of native grass? We do have NAP coverage, but it requires county-wide loss, and unfortunately, our region of the county typically suffers from drought when other areas do not, and this results in no loss for the county.
I will double check, but I do not believe that county-wide loss is necessary if you can document it on your place. Janae, is that correct?
That's correct. If they have other forages, similar forages, they can use the similar yields under NAP.
And this brings up another important point. You know, producer representation on our county committees is critical. If you're not contemplating serving on those, find out who is your representative and ensure that they are adequately representing your interests. And, you know, they have a role in the delivery of these programs. And we have an opportunity as citizen stakeholders to take advantage of that. And that doesn't really exist anywhere else in the federal government. You can't get on your local post office board and have them build a post office station right next to your place, but you can be on the county committee and help us deliver these programs in a more relevant, locally driven manner. Sometimes with just a handful of votes.
Go ahead, Laura.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I live in Kiowa County and we have an amazing FSA office. I cannot complain at all. Donna Wyrick is our CED and she's great. And we also have a pretty good NRCS program, which we have been actively involved with for many years. My husband currently sits on the Conservation District and I have a really good relationship with our FSA committee, county committee. And so they've done a really good job trying to assist us and help us out. In fact, I was one of the ones, I work with Ben Berlinger, who is a raised conservationist with NRCS, and he's a good friend and an excellent resource. I have multiple grazing cages. In fact, they actually removed half of our grazing cages from the county data collection because they said it was weighting it too much toward the dry, and they were trying to get grazing cage clippings from other areas of the county to be more representative of the geographic distribution. And but unfortunately, we haven't had a lot of other area producers being willing to do that type of data collection to actually say this is the documentation. So they have all that information and so forth. And when the decision is made, truthfully, as one of the previous NRCS directors said, Laura, you are the epicenter of the drought more years than not. And we just don't get the NAP coverage for grass acres. And so maybe I'm misunderstanding something, but I would really think that we would be getting it because Donna's excellent at making sure that the producers are well taken care of when it comes to these programs.
So it would need to be like a NAP yield loss documented based on the APH and the historical yields for the producer. The cages are great tools for NRCS, but those alone are not enough documentation, or has not been in the past, in order to qualify an individual producer for that independent assessment loss.
So what do we do? Because we're talking native grass. We're not talking about, crop forage that is put in. We're talking about native grass. So what type of, I'm very familiar with APH and so forth, because we farm, thousands of acres. So I'm very familiar with what you get on RMH history and so forth. But how do we do this for native grass acres then?
And I believe that's why they did put in the policy for those independent assessments being used. And Colorado set the county as our boundary. I don't know if there's additional comments that you guys would like.
Laura, could I ask you a question? Have you or any of your neighbors participated in the PRF coverage, and did any loss get indicated by that? Pasture rangeland forage coverage for your local insurance provider?
Who was that to? Who was that to?
That was back to Laura.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Sorry, I got muted again. Now can you?
I'm sorry about that, Laura.
That's okay. So am I online now?
You're on now, yeah.
Okay. Yes, we've utilized PRF for 4 years now, and it's been good. It pays for the premium that we have on the grass acres with a little bit extra. But I mean, the most I've ever gotten was about $6,000 one time, and the rest has been minimal to that after the premium was paid. And but I, like last year, due to the huge wind event that we had in December of 2021, 2021, we had a massive wind event that came through. It destroyed 23 miles of our fences, literally scoured the native grasses down to the crown. And then we had a very dry summer in 2022, and we had minimal grass growth. And I did not utilize those grass acres at all. I deferred them completely and utilized emergency CRP grazing, which has been a benefit to us. But I'm going to be working with Ben Berlinger here at the end of May or April, 1st of May, to do an evaluation, which we do every year in the spring. But it's not looking good on some of those grass acres that suffered a loss back in December of 21. And it's looking like we're still not going to have much forage production going into this spring of 23, because we've had very dry conditions. And unfortunately, we are not catching the moisture that you all are getting. I'm actually in Greeley right now, but I just talked to my son. He says it's dry, warm, and windy down in Kiowa County. So that's kind of what I was wondering. I hope I didn't make it too complicated with my response, but yes, we do use PRF.
So as we continue to try to tailor these programs to better fit the actual reality out there, information like that is helpful to us. So if you wouldn't mind reaching out to me with your email address, or my email address is in the chat window here, but email me your particular circumstances and lay out the fact that PRF indicates there's a loss, NAP doesn't, so that we can start to maybe take a look at finding a better way to measure that, apart from having a weather station in every producer's yard. How can we get a better set of information? It sounds like you had part of the solution there, and for whatever reason, you were too dry and messing up the county. I don't know. So share a little bit of that with me in my email, and I'd appreciate an opportunity to talk with the team and then get back to you.
Okay, can you still hear me, Zach?
I can.
Okay, yeah, I will do that. You said your email was in the chat.
It's zach.ducheneau@usda.gov.
I see it now. Thank you very much. And I will get back with you to kind of explain it, because the other dilemma we run into is because we do not have interest and risk in both the grass acres and the livestock, that oftentimes throws us out of some of these program payments. But we're still not able to generate income, because if I'm a grass farmer who uses cattle to harvest my grass acres, they're my combines, and so I'm losing income as a result. So thank you very much for your response.
Thank you, Laura. I also have a question from Adam that says, Adam Ortega asks, can range analysis platform help with this?
Possibly, but I'm not sure what that is, so. I'd have to-
Adam, I'm going to open up so you can say, you can fill us in a little bit on that question.
Hello, can you guys hear me?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so range analysis platform, it's the database where they keep track of like long-term range data, including production. It's pretty new, and I know it just got adopted into ARS and with NRCS, so it could help with that question on the last one. Long-term forage production.
Thank you.
Yeah, that might be a tool that we can use. We will take a look at it and see what we can glean from it.
Okay, and then we have Steve asks, is PRF included or excluded as income in PARP or ERP?
So I don't have that answer off of the top of my head. I did pull up the fact sheet, and it looks like for ERP, crop insurance proceeds less administrative fees and premiums are allowable revenue. And then for PARP, allowable revenue is crop insurance proceeds received from federal crop insurance or private plan of insurance, regardless of crop year, as reported to IRS. But those fact sheets are great tools.
Thank you, Janae. Okay, and Jelaine, I'll go ahead and share that phone number with Mr. Ducheneau. And I think that for now, I've covered everybody's questions.
We just need to hit the answered questions.
Oh, that's right. So I was going to read through the questions. Why is there a payment limitation on ELAP with a long event that has and is occurring? There is no payment limitation on ELAP is the answer for that.
Let me, can I interrupt for just a second on that one? I apologize. I had it included in the payment limitation and it was removed in the 18 Farm Bill. So I apologize about that. And thank you for pointing that out.
The next one is, will transportation of feed and livestock to feed be paid due to the winter event and not drought? The FSA State Committee will need to request this weather event be added as eligible. It is currently tied to drought, but there is the authority for additional weather requests. Okay. The next question was, will LFP be used for grazing loss on winter grazing allotments on BLM lands? This is currently being reviewed in policy discussions. Let me see what question we just got in. This is a question for Mr. Ducheneau. Our local county FSA director and COC have informed us producers that they are prohibited from communicating to state or national FSA to identify problems or concerns with various USDA programs. Would you clarify?
I will clarify by stating that my phone number and my email are on our website. And everybody in the country has been made aware that they are free to use it. So we can, if you'll let me know what county offline, not here, we can have a conversation with them.
The next question was, why won't Colorado include January to May as part of the grazing season? Could be beneficial for grazing loss due to winter events. Colorado should review grazing periods to ensure that they are correct and align with needs. If they don't, they can be adjusted.
Can I add to that? I was typing pretty fast here. I should note that there's several counties in Colorado that have gone to a 365-day grazing period. So if the county in question, you know, if you'd like us to help review that, we'd be certainly willing to do so. So just for clarity, that those can be adjusted.
Thank you. Galen. Oh yeah, Galen asked, regarding NAP, I farm in 2 contiguous counties, but entire operation is administered in 1 county. Do I have to buy separate NAP policies for each county? This answer depends on whether each of your farms are administered in the same county. If they are, there is no need to buy in each county. And I think that was it. Okay.
I think we're good. We've
Yeah, I
covered
think
all
we're
of them
good.
that were answered. We appreciate the administrator engaging directly and the acting deputy administrator putting some things in writing for folks. Just as a reminder, this is recorded or was recorded and will be posted on the CDA website. There's also the FSA and SBA resource links in the chat. So before we go offline, if you want to grab those.
Dan, could I interrupt real quick? Just to
Absolutely.
One closing thought. To the producers out there, never, ever leave our office without submitting an application or requesting a receipt for service if you're interested in participating in our programs, because an application denied ends your due process. So ask for a receipt for service, ask for an application and say, I understand the deadline has lapsed. I'd like to submit it anyway, because Mr. Ducheneau has told me that disapproved applications have value in the crafting of further policy. They might gripe and grumble at me over that, but we cannot have folks leaving these offices without having been afforded an opportunity to document their loss and document their willingness and interest in participating in our programs.
We appreciate that, sir. And as the administrator said, his email is in the chat. That is his standard operating procedure. I've seen several of his webinars and meetings online. Commissioner Greenberg, anything to close us out?
Just a final thank you again to everyone on this call today. I hope that this has been helpful, and I hope that you take away that we are here. You've got cell phone numbers, emails, direct lines of communication. Yet again, Administrator Ducheneau, thank you so much for taking the time. Acting Director Whitbridge, thank you as well. Director Miyamoto, thank you for your ongoing partnership, and to our fellow partners across Colorado. We couldn't do this without your partnership, and I hope our folks in the ag community know that you can pick up the phone and call any one of us at any time with any questions. So thank you. Thanks, Dan.
And with that, we'll end the webinar. We're right on time.